I worked with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London, which is a not-for-profit organisation, for 8 months, looking at structural funds and tracking structural funds across the 27 member states. So it was a collaborative effort with the Financial Times, looking at basically who were receiving these funds. So we're trying to track a huge amount of money across the 27 member states in kind of formats that are very badly collated and presented. So it was a team of journalists, researchers, and people with data backgrounds. So the aim was to track 347 billion euros of expenditure. So the expenditure is allocated on a 7-year period from 2007 to 13. But what we wanted to do is, because we were approaching the funding period mid-cycle, we decided just to kind of get what was in the public domain already. So we went through over 100 websites across the 27 member states in 21 European languages. And to do that, at times we used the Commission's portal, which kind of allows you to access down into the regional information, and then kind of pulled it together in a comparable way. In the end, we came up with 646,000 recipients. Now that was as of November last year. I think there'll probably be, it's probably more like around the 8,000 mark at the moment. And really, if you wanted to do the project in a really comprehensive way, you should wait until 2013. But we did get a good kind of, the database really acts as a snapshot of what we found at that time. Much of the data we found as we went through it was unpublished, and there were particular countries that were not so hot on publishing the data. Italy was one, and it's very hard to get the information because they don't have an FOI Act as well. And certain countries, like Bulgaria, would publish a scanned photograph or photocopy of a document. So you wouldn't actually be able to kind of pull it out in a machine-readable format because it would all be in Cyrillic as well. When it came to the likes of Bavaria, they would publish locked PDFs, so even if you wanted to copy and paste, you couldn't. You had to buy expensive software in order to extract the information. So although this is transparency, as the Commission defines it in terms of having the data published, they are ticking the boxes, but it's not transparency in the sense that you can actually make any sense of the data that exists. So yeah, it took us 8 months, and we had no idea what we were getting into when we started. We knew people who had worked on farm subsidy, like Jack Thurston, and had discussed with them how they kind of pulled the data together, and thought, well, surely we can give it a shot and it won't take that long. But yeah, 8 months, and we employed people with just about every different language at different stages in the project in order to call up the regional development offices and harangue them until they give us the data. And yeah, in the end, what we came up with was the database with 646,000 recipients, which is in front of the Financial Times paywall. I, on a personal note, have been engaged in a long-term, about 2-3 month discussion with the lawyers at the Financial Times in order to have the database made public. The whole idea of kind of doing the project was that we wanted the data to be open and accessible to everybody. At the time when the database was completed, the Bureau ourselves, we didn't really have the resources to host such a big database. So we wanted to hand it over to the FT, where they had kind of resources to manage it and update it. And as well, if there was a lot of traffic, that basically it wouldn't fall over. So we hope in the next month or two, though I've been saying that for the past month or two, but I really hope that in the coming weeks that we're going to actually get the database fully available for download. So if you want to go to the website, you can click on it and access it in a CSV or an Excel format, though it will only be up to date as of November last year. So what we uncovered in terms of stories as we went through the database was very interesting. We had a lot of macro analysis of kind of how the funds were being spent, about the kind of administrative costs that people encountered in terms of kind of trying to access the funds was a big area, and also looking at the uptake of funds in countries, particularly like Romania, which has hit the headlines again of late because they don't have the match funding in order to absorb the funds. But in terms of the sexy headlines, I guess, we came across the 'Ndrangheta in Calabria, in the southern region of Italy, who are accessing the structural funds. Yeah.
Say a bit more about that, because I guess there's no box that we have to click for the member of the mafia or
No.
So I'm curious, but or is it from criminal records?
How did you find out that the company was belonging to?
But how did you find out that the company was belonged to Ndrangheta?
Yeah. There were two methods, there were two ways that we actually got the information. Really the story is thanks to a colleague of mine called Federico Gatti, who's an Italian journalist. He had very good links with the anti-mafia directorate in Italy and groups like Lega Ambiente as well, who kind of look at corruption in particular sectors in Italy. And we had heard that there was this highway that was receiving a lot of money. It's the Reggio Calabria Salerno highway. Pardon?
Never ending.
Yeah. I think that was probably one of the reasons as well, that the fact that the project was going on for so long and was costing way more than anyone had kind of expected at the start, that there were alarm bells going off anyway for journalists generally. So when Federico got in touch with the anti-mafia directorate, they were told that they believed that there was a lot of mafia involvement. So we started doing more investigation into that area. And the way they were actually using the structural funds to make a profit was by as the highway was built, each mafia family had control of particular areas. But it's all done in a legitimate way, where the mafia own companies. So the companies are the fronts whereby they make the money, but they massively overinflate the price of building the road. So then they're skimming the profits, and that becomes the proceeds of crime. Other ways in which the mafia extort money from people who are operating that in those areas is if the company is not a mafia front, that if you want protection, if you don't want your vehicles and your plant and machinery to be destroyed, you pay the mafia for protection money, but you're protecting yourself from the mafia, basically. So those points were actually most widely covered in that we did an Al Jazeera documentary about it, and we did quite a bit on the mafia in the Reggio Calabria highway.
How much money was it?
I don't know offhand, which is a failing on my part. And I'm sure actually I'll find out for you after the session. I'll go through some of the documents because I know that we have kind of like a rough estimate. It's quite hard, I suppose, to put a definite figure on something that's not transparent. Oh, tens of millions, yeah.
I don't know if it's a result of your coverage, but I know that the Court of Auditors issued a report on involvement of mafia in the windmill industry in the south of Italy.
I'm trying to remember his
There's a special report on it, which is quite a nice read.
This is mafia in Sicily, and this one is Ndrangheta in Calabria. Two different things are.
Yeah.
Get triggered by. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that was also actually we also did a report on that, which was done for BBC File on 4, which is like a radio documentary, and it's Vittorio Nicastri is the name of the mafia leader, and his way of making money was a very similar kind of process to the people who are kind of skimming funds off the Reggio Calabria highway, where you set up a completely legitimate business, and wind farms was the way to make money. And in Italian, I don't know exactly what it translates as into Italian, but his nickname was the Lord of the Wind. Yeah. And they set up a lot of legitimate businesses in the south of Italy. And because as actually Chris was saying yesterday, if I was a criminal, I would be looking at these funds and thinking, what are their objectives this year? What areas are they going to really be pouring money into and kind of throwing money at? Because
in most places where the wind has been placed, there is no wind. That's the problem.
yeah, you have wind farms, not creating any energy at all, or wind farms that don't exist, wind farms that are planned but are never actually constructed. I've seen some photos, though I haven't seen them in person, so I don't believe something until I see it in front of me, of just kind of windmills in the middle of towns, like a windmill in the middle of a street or on the side of a street, because these people are so powerful that they can get planning permission for anything anywhere. But there's a couple of images of that kind of thing on the internet as well, supposedly funded with EU structural funds. And in the case of the wind farms in Sicily, I know, as far as I know, it's part of an ongoing investigation. I don't think it's been closed yet, but it's something that we were discussing, another way of finding out how intelligent these people were at accessing structural funds, is that it didn't just happen in Italy. This was a string of companies that went from Italy to Spain to France and then to the Netherlands to an offshore tax haven registered in the Antilles. So it was really hard to actually track where the money's going and how much money they actually made out of it anyway. But yeah, so the Ndrangheta was the focus of one of the stories. We also, found that the companies linked to criminal investigations, like the wind companies in Italy, were receiving structural funds. In Spain, the criminal investigations is a part of a bigger case called the Malaya case. I'm fluent in Spanish, so I did a lot of the research on looking at companies linked to the Malaya cases. When you look at the Canary Islands, there was a massive boom of construction of hotels, and the same around the southern coasts. And a lot of the planning permission was obtained illegally or through bribery, which is all coming out now. And there's a lot of it's quite senior civil servants and town planning agents in these offices being arrested. But a lot of the funds were given for the construction of these hotels through structural funds, through the European Social Fund, so for the employment of people in order to construct the hotels. And in the cases with the illegal developments in UNESCO areas, that was looking at the Canary Islands, where the entire island of Lanzarote is a biosphere, and there's not to be certain types of development. A lot of these hotels contravened that, and they'd received, I think, about 24 million euros from structural funds. Though the process they received the funds back in 2001. Now there's an ongoing OLAF investigation into that, and there's a couple of MEPs. Actually, Bart Stays, a Dutch MEP, I think, he's Belgian, has been in touch with me about that as well. But they're still, 10 years later, they're still trying to claw the money back. And the reason it's so difficult to get the money back from a project run in the Canary Islands like this is because the people who receive the money in the first place are big business players, and it's not really in anyone's interest in the town halls or the regional development offices to kind of go after them asking for millions back, because they're quite powerful. So in the end, what happens in a case like this is that the funds are reclaimed, but they're reclaimed from the central government. So the structural funds will be reclaimed from the structural funds office in Madrid. Or how it technically happens is that the commission will say, well, we know that about 20 million euros has been misappropriated from the structural funds. So the next time we give you the upcoming installment, we're just going to deduct that 20. You're not going to get it. We're going to withhold it. And so they don't actually effectively pay it back. What the actual regional development office has to do is kind of claw the money back from the business that's misappropriated the funds in the first place. And when I spoke to some of the hotel developers who really didn't give a crap, they were quite funny, quite entertaining, and kind of their approach to it. They were saying, no one's ever approached me for the funds, and I'm definitely not going down to offer, another 2 million euro back to the Spanish government. No one's actually asked me for the money, which is interesting in itself. It's probably another investigation for a local Spanish journalist to do. Then we also find kind of large companies like IKEA, Siemens and Danone receiving structural funds. There's nothing technically illegal about that, but they're intended originally for small to medium enterprises. So when you see companies like that coming up again and again, receiving millions, you kind of have to ask, I mean, are these funds really being used for the right purpose? There are also companies that are not supposed to be included in structural funding projects, like British American Tobacco in Bavaria were receiving €1.5 million. There is also another tobacco processing plant in Poland that was receiving money, and Japan Tobacco International as well. Defence companies are not supposed, they're supposed to be, not allowed to receive structural funds. This kind of brings up a couple of questions about how the funds are dispersed, in the sense that you have companies like Finmeccanica, who are an Italian company who've been involved in quite a lot of scandals anyway with tax evasion and linked to French, yeah. Did you get that? Amelia was just saying, sure.
Half public and half private company, Finmeccanica.
They are also involved in developing military products, but they're receiving structural funds. But it's quite hard to say, in the rules it says you must not give money for military purposes or for military research. But then if you're giving money to a company that's involved in developing drone technology like Thales or EADS or BAE Systems, but they're saying that they're not using it for military purposes, how can I really be sure that they're not? And is it not the same in the end anyway?
There's a classic thing of displacement funding here, which means, and you get this a lot with aid and other sorts of benefits, which is that you put the money, that you'd put the structural, if I was running the company and wanted to make benefit of it, I would put the money towards all sorts of things which were general and that the military side relied upon, but weren't specifically denoted as military. So let's say, for example, you want to build better drones, and in order to do better drones, one of the problems for better drones is you need a certain type of engine that works at a certain slow speed or something like that. Now, that engine could be developed for other things as well, but it's actually a requirement for this better drone. And so you would do it you'd put the money in terms of that. And as a spin-off, you have a better drone. It may be that there's civilian usage as well, but actually that's not the point. That's not why you're doing it. So it's all the time this happens with when you've got aid, or even actually to a degree in reverse way in sanctions, where you have the money comes in or effects happen, and you then, it allows you to displace things in other ways. So that would be, if I was running an aerospace company that did military and a bit of civilian, that's how I would do it.
Yeah. Just on the other stories, I feel like maybe I'm kind of going off on a couple of tangents. But on the other stories, we had solar panel companies in Germany who create solar panels using cadmium, which is a restricted product. You're not supposed to use cadmium in solar panels because when they're disposed of, it creates, it's highly toxic, basically. And it's a restricted product on European Commission guidelines. However, they do specify if there is no other alternative, which there are now for cadmium products, you may use it. There's a new company set up in Germany that's using cadmium to create solar panels, which are being then exported at a very cheap cost to third world countries, where they won't be disposed of properly. But they're also receiving structural funds. I'm guessing all of this is happening because it's just slipping under the radar, because there is no centralized system. No people have ever really had access to a database of complete beneficiaries until we pulled it together. And in those terms, it's that's why you have when it's decentralized, it makes it a bit more weak. So the coverage, as you know, was exclusively run with the FT, and then the Al Jazeera BBC File on 4 and BBC World also picked up the reportage. So this is what the actual database looks like. I have had quite a couple of calls from journalists who find it difficult to navigate and it's probably not very well explained by looking at it. There's on that pad that I flagged up at the start, there's a link to the database. So if you want to go to that, I can show you how to do some searches. And I would say as well, there's actually a number of stories. There's a story actually about a Swedish military company that's receiving funds that we didn't get to cover. We've got something like €4 million in funds going to French Guiana military trading government centre, but there's lots of stories that we just didn't get to cover. So I hope that some people here will be able to take them up. So yeah, if you go to that pad, there'll be a link through to this database. When you go to the ft.com/EU funds front page, you can click, I think it's up on the upper right-hand corner, there's a little part, and you can go through to this search interface. And what you're searching by, has everyone got it, or can you access it? So when you click on that link in the pad, in this one, and you click on this, yeah. Yeah, it should bring you to here, and then you click on this. Okay, and that will allow you to do searches. You click on this one. Okay. Inside the EU funds, search the database. Okay. So this is what it looks like. And I'm just going to actually just tell you how we got the data in first, which is maybe a little bit boring, but it took me 8 months. So, so I'm going to tell you. Basically, when you go to the Commission's website, DG Regio website, we kind of went through this yesterday, but it's useful for you as well if you want to go back and find out your own particular region's funding. If you want to look at Swedish funding or Italian, this is the way you would do it. So you go to the DG Regio website. I can put the series of links up for you if you want afterwards, if it would be of use. You click into the beneficiaries of the cohesion policy, and then this drop-down box on the side, select a country. I've just gone for the Netherlands. Then when you go into that, regardless of the country, it'll break it down by region for you. And when you click on that, it'll bring you down into the Regional Development Office's website. And then what you've got to do is find the data, which is usually not very clear. So in this one, as far as I know, when you go to projects, it gives you an option for a PDF, which you can download. And in some cases, some will be quite open and have Excel files, some will have PDFs, and some will have very kind of wacky looking web pages where everything looks super high tech and it's put on a map and it tells you exactly how much funding they got and when they got the funding, but it's kind of a nightmare to actually get the information out of. But if you know how to scrape and you want to have a class of Friedrich later on, you can find out how to do that. So what you want to get from this is something that looks like this. So you want to get all the data into a file where it's comparable. So this is Italy. When you put it all down together, when you put all the regional offices together, we came up, this is part of the Italy file. And this is what's kind of behind the FT database. So this is what you're searching. When you put in for a certain phrase, this is where all the data is coming from. So I'll go back to this so we can do some of the searches. In order to do the best way to find what you're looking for is to either have a certain area in mind, like military or defense or tobacco, or the name of a company. So what you're putting into that search box is the name of a company. So if you want to put in, you can try IKEA or Coca-Cola or Siemens or IBM or Acciona, which is a big Spanish infrastructure company, and you'll find out the recipients of those funds. And what you get at the top is, there are two figures at the top in red. So you have a declared and an estimated amount. So it's a wee bit confusing, but what you're looking at is the estimated amount is the estimate of the total cost of all the projects run by this company based on the co-financing rate. So all the projects have to be partially funded by the European institutions and partially funded either by the national government or the actual company itself.
Question to you and also to Chris. Do we have a database or information of companies who owns who? What company is related to another one? Because now you say, okay, I look for Siemens, but not all the companies who belong to Siemens are called Siemens or have to have. Okay, thanks.
There's a short answer, there's a medium answer, there's a long answer. The short answer is no. The long answer, catch me later and I'll go through it in detail. The medium answer is that there are reasons to do with legal and philosophical, but also access to data, why it's almost impossible to do that in a standard way. You know, this data doesn't exist, and also there are ambiguities, which means it's sort of impossible generally. But what we can do, for example, is so one of the things we did on Open Corporates was to do a thing called corporate groupings. So to say, I've got what you would think of as what a person would think of as Siemens, and I can't tell you that this company over here is owned by this company, is owned by this company, which is owned by Siemens, not GmbH, but whatever you can't say it's owned by that. You can't do the custody chain, if you like. But what you can say is, I know that it is declared somewhere, or I know that it is part of this big group. So it allows you to almost like take a fuzzy concept, which is Siemens. That fuzzy concept is automatically associated with the Wikipedia page as well. So it's connecting to that. One of the things that there's a guy in Belgium called Anders Peterson, I think, it's the Netherlands. So yeah, he's done one for Maersk, for the shipping company. He's found 147 companies for Maersk and attached them to the Maersk corporate grouping. The first thing is that because that's there now as data and you can download it as data, then that job has to a certain extent been done, or most of it's been done. There might be new ones added and so on, but that has mostly been done. What it means is that automatically when data is actually added, so when a new trademark is added, when we add data, let's say that one of those Maersk companies appears on the lobbying register, which we'll be putting in the next couple of days, then it will appear on the corporate grouping page for Maersk. So it sort of allows the crowd, the community, or journalists to build for specific companies, to build this graph, to build the network, if that makes sense.
So you set up a kind of infrastructure where you can say, okay, it's just by an idea, I know this company is related, or you can say it's more harder, but at the end, just to have a kind of map where you see, they belong.
And, one of the things, we did this, a lot of the banks, because, Barclays has got something like, I don't know, 800, there are 800 companies called Barclays already in the database. And we're still lots of countries. We haven't got Germany, for example. But but a lot of them aren't called Barclays. They're called other things, And it was set up partly for things like that. But people are using it for different things. For example, football clubs. Someone's done a network of the Birmingham City Football Club. The 4 or 5 companies that make up Birmingham City. Somebody did Pink Floyd. The companies associated with Pink Floyd. So you can actually start to see there's some kind of cool stuff that's some potential for doing that. So, sorry, I didn't mean to go on about. It's just it's one of the areas that I.
Cool. Okay. So if everyone's on the database, if you want to take a search, I don't know if anyone's done a search in the meantime. No? You could try Finmeccanica or IKEA or Siemens. What you're really searching for is beneficiary. So the recipient of the fund is who you're searching for. Now, it kind of makes it a little bit complicated in a way because it's not very transparent. in a similar way to how the Commission databases are. It's not very transparent because you have to know exactly what you're looking for. So once it's available for an entire download, then you'll be able to play through it. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for coming, Ron.
Sorry to, it's 8 months' work.
Oh, not at all. Thank you. Good luck. So in terms of actually finding the stories, there are different ways of approaching it. You can either approach the database and kind of type in what you're looking for in terms of kind of a company or a beneficiary. So it's kind of approaching the data with a hypothesis. You're approaching it thinking, I want to find out how much a particular defense company got, or if I put in the word defense or military, maybe I'll come up with something interesting. But you're approaching it thinking that these companies are probably in there, so you already have a hypothesis or a bit of a prejudice as you're approaching it. There are other ways as well of kind of using the data or finding database stories, which is kind of an exploratory approach, which is what we'd like to do eventually, which we haven't succeeded in doing yet. We've had a couple of ideas of how to kind of track companies as when their open date and their close date and when they receive structural funds. So a way of doing this is that you have no idea what you're going to get, but you have two sets of information, and by kind of melding them together, you're exploring possibilities in it. You're not suggesting that you don't have an idea of what you're going to get, but it's a way of exploring it. I find at the moment, now I would hope in the future this would change, but I find at the moment if you're approaching the data with kind of a hypothesis or a bit of a prejudice, that you're going to find your stories quicker. And there's a couple of ways of doing this that makes it easier. So quick tricks, I guess, are if you know the fund rules, if you know what's exempt, you can't fund military, you can't fund tobacco, you can't fund cadmium, it has to be small to medium enterprises. You know what you're looking for, so you go and you look for the things that contradict the rules, so you've got a story instantly, if you find it. Also looking at regional criminal proceedings. So for me, going through the Malaya case in Spain provided me with the names of company owners. I could then put that into databases like a Bureau van Dijk or Orbis database and find out what companies were connected to this person, and then look through my structural funds database to see had those companies received funds. And it turned out that there were about 20 million.
So how do you have access to regional criminal proceedings? I mean, how do you have access to the regional criminal proceedings?
Yeah, well, the thing is that I think it really depends on kind of your journalistic knowledge on a local level. It would be difficult for me to to find out about criminal issues in France because I don't speak French and I don't have a knowledge of regional politics. But for regional journalists here, and I know quite a lot of you are working on publications in the Netherlands, you would know the hot topics, or you would know the kind of areas that there are questions around, or the big characters, or the players, the big politicians who have links to certain companies that there are always questions around. Especially in Italy, I think there's just so much dirt, you could have a field day. But in Sweden, I mean, you would know the companies maybe connected to is it the Prime Minister who's linked to oil companies in Ethiopia and West? So I mean, if you have the name of, well, it's usually not the politician, is it? It's usually his right-hand man who's the dirty guy. So you find out all the companies, by searching what companies he's linked to. Then look at all those companies and find out which of those got funds, and then you can kind of build a story that way. And then there's ideal world methods, which, as I said, we haven't been able to do yet. But this is an idea that Chris and I discussed the other day, is looking at companies that open and close in a very short period of time. So looking particularly in Italy. In a dream world, what we'd like to be able to do is find out, say, all the companies in Sicily that find out when they opened, when they registered, and when they closed. And especially the ones that have a very short lifespan, look at which of those companies applied for funds. So they're kind of ways of, you're approaching the data with a kind of hypothesis that you're probably going to find something looking within, you know, if you think that you're going to find companies that have just opened for a very short period of time in order to get funds, you're approaching it with an idea, but you're pulling two databases together. We haven't been able to do that yet because we don't have the data about company opening and closing dates. It's quite hard to get. So yeah, as I said already, these are the areas, if you wanted a quick hit, these are the areas that you could look into. You look into arms companies, tobacco companies, cadmium, competition relocation laws is something that the Commission is very hot on. There are certain regulations in structural funds rules that say you can give funds for a company to develop or employ people in a new area as long as you're not funding the relocation of a company. So there's the case that came up for us was Twinings in the UK was relocating to Poland. But they were receiving structural funds in Poland, which would enable them or encourage them to do this. So the Polish regional development authorities were encouraging a company to leave one area of the EU and create jobs in another, but it would be to the detriment of a northern city in the UK. And structural funds are not meant to be used for this because it's just a way for a company to use taxpayers' money to its own advantage, but not to actually benefit the taxpayer themselves. So that there's, if you know of big businesses which are relocating to other areas in Europe, you can kind of look if they're receiving structural funds as well, because it's against the rules. So at least you'll get a headline out of it, but you may also actually get some change whereby the Commission claws back the money. In the case of Twinings, I know they've taken the money back. No. Pardon? Okay.
No, she had a production in Poland, I think in Romania or something like that, or in Romania or Serbia.
Be interesting to look at what the real cost of that is, what the impact is, kind of, because there might be, the Italian government. Are they relocating from Italy to Romania then?
They're closing some production in Italy and relocating them in some other countries in Europe. I don't remember which one.
If you looked at something like the Globalization Adjustment Fund, the Italian government's probably going to apply for funding in order to train the people who are losing their jobs from the Fiat factory. But then again, you might find that they're also funding Fiat themselves to kind of relocate and add new skills, develop people's skills in Romania to work in their factories. So you're kind of, and if that's the case, you're kind of funding both sides. You're funding people who are losing their jobs, and you're also funding people to develop skills to get new jobs. But there's a possible story in that. We could look at that later, though. I would imagine in order to get a story like that, what you'd need to do is look at the region. You'd need to look at the region in Romania where the company is relocating to, and get their data and find out if Fiat is receiving money in that area, because as the company is relocating there, that's where they would be getting funds to encourage them to set up. So we could look at that afterwards if you want to, if you're interested in doing that. Yeah, if you go through the Commission portal, you should get there. So yeah, if you want to, I don't know if you want to try and work through the database yourselves. It might help in terms of when you leave, if there's any stories that you want to look at. Is that a yes? Is that a no? That's a I don't know.
Have you basically finished what you...
No, there are a couple of other areas, but I just wanted to give you the option of, why don't you put in to the structural funds database something like military or defence or tobacco and see what you come up with. I'm not guaranteeing you'll come up with anything. Or I can do it up here. So say I want to look at Acciona, the big Spanish construction company who gets a lot of tenders and is quite interesting because Javier Solana, the previous High Commissioner, now works for Acciona. So I would put in the name of what I suspect to be the beneficiary and just search it. And the database, doesn't matter what language you put a term in. I mean, when it comes to a company, you're going to usually come up with it doesn't matter about the language anyway, but if you put in defense in Italian or Spanish, it searches through every language in the EU. Hopefully it will work. And what it does is it searches, we've put all the data in, the data behind the interface is in English and in all the member state languages. So we've put the information in the original languages. So with this, you can see that Acciona is receiving, can I do this? Or will I take one of these? I'm just gonna. You can see that Acciona is receiving 37 individual grants. So that's where it says Spain and in brackets 37. It means they're receiving 37 individual structural fund grants in Spain. This tells you the region. So if you wanted to actually go back to the original data, you can click on this hyperlink here and it'll bring you through to the community of Valencia data, where it came from. So this is the beneficiary. So every beneficiary field or every project and description field will have the word Acciona in it because that's what you've searched for. This is an option where if you are a citizen or a politician or someone who has information about the company and what they're doing, you want to let us know, you can report it and we'll look into the story. And this is the estimated EU funding, which I'll explain in a minute. It's a bit complicated. And then this is the fund. It's either the European Social Fund, the ESF, or the ERDF, European Regional Development. So the social fund is for kind of training people in new skills areas, and regional development is usually for big kind of infrastructure projects. Just on the declared and estimated EU funds, because all structural funds are co-financed, so it's an EU amount and either a private or government amount of money. In some cases, though Spain's not an issue, the regional development offices haven't declared how much money is actually EU money. They've just put down the total project cost. So I'll say, I want to build a road and it's going to cost me 10 million, but I'm not going to kind of define that 5 million of this is coming from the Commission and 5 million is coming from the national government. I'm just going to put the whole amount in. So what we have to do is apply what's known as a co-financing rate. So every area will have a different rate of money they have to put in compared to the Commission. Anyway, quite boring and technical, but that's what you're seeing here. So a declared amount is when the regional development office has said, this is the amount of EU money, and so we've added all that up, and this is what you're seeing here. The estimated amount is when they haven't declared it openly. It's not very transparent. We've had to apply this co-financing rate. You're usually best, if you ever want to use this in order to do a story or do some research, you're okay to go with the estimated amount because it won't be over the amount of money. We've just underestimated it in terms of avoiding masses of criticism from the Commission. Does that help? Does it make sense? Yeah? Yeah? Hey, Eric.
I see that under the items on the list, you have this button. Tell us about this project. I just wonder if you got any feedback.
Very little.
Yeah,
Very little.
that's what I imagine.
Yeah.
And the second question is about the amounts. There's one amount, or if I scroll down a bit, what strikes me, and I also saw that in some other searches that I did while you were talking, is that these amounts are so incredibly low that it's a bit amazing that they get a funding of 842 euros. It seems to me that the balance is lost a bit between administrative costs for such a thing and the amount of money. So I wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
That's very interesting because it is, maybe there are some typos, but in certain regions of Spain for the social funds, we find people who are claiming things like £5. So you just wonder, but because a lot of small enterprises complain about the amount of paperwork they have to do in order to get EU funds, that it's such a disincentive.
Could it be that these were...
Could it be that these are invoice line items in a way as well? So that let's say that they are invoicing a department and the invoice is for you know, 100,000 euros, and it's broken down into things, and because they're categorized into different things, it might be worse than doing it like that. Or I'm just trying to think in terms of, you know, if you're a big company, you actually probably don't want to be invoicing for £5, for €5, or you know, or even 100 euros, because it's just not the, you know, it's going to cost you more to process that than it is to be doing it. So I'm wondering if it's if there's some process thing which causes those things to crop up, rather than rather than actually being a proper claim for that amount.
Well,
For the big companies, certainly.
Two things, well, but it's usually not big companies, it's usually small companies which are just doing social fund training. And probably is something like a regional development, like a little regional training office who has got 20 companies in for the day doing some training, and they're just doing a reclaim on their lunch. But when we were doing the research, we met a lot of consultants who worked in this area, and it's a massive area for people to make money and set up businesses, is in advising people how to get structural funds. So there are a lot of companies and agencies in the UK where, because it's so complicated to do all the paperwork, that's their job. They go around to people saying, you're a small to medium enterprise, you could be eligible for structural funds, we'll draw up the contract for you, but in the contract we're also going to say that we get 30% of the funds. But you know, it's a win-win for the company because they're getting the money anyway. They wouldn't have been able to apply, they wouldn't have known how to apply and kind of navigate all the red tape without these consultancies. But they do make a lot of money from that. I'm just going to go back to the presentation. I've only got 5 minutes left, but if you have any questions, either I can kind of continue with the presentation or answer any questions. I don't think I've got much left. It's up to you. Yeah, okay. So yeah, interesting areas to look at. So there were a couple of areas at the time when we were doing the research that were really quite contentious, and that there was a lot of discussion in the Commission about. And I was interested to find out more. One of the areas is biofuels. So there's a lot of discussion around what are, you know, ecologically sound biofuels about. And there's been a lot of, I suppose, policy manipulation within the Commission about kind of biofuel guidelines and what constitutes you know, carbon neutral kind of growing of biofuels, or what we're actually going to, what are the aims really when we're throwing so much money at biofuels and funding renewable sources of energy. What are we actually trying to achieve? And there are certain types of biofuels which have been proven in scientific studies not to be very ecologically friendly. And there's one big Portuguese company that's getting 64 million euros in structural funds, which I think would be interesting to investigate if anyone wants to do it. I've never had the time, but should if you want to. I think it would be interesting to actually look at where they're sourcing their biofuels from, because a lot of it's coming from Africa. So it might be coming from ethanol, it might be coming from palm oil, and it would be interesting to see that if we're giving lots of taxpayers' money to a company that's meant to be, you know, for kind of ecologically sound uses, but the methods by which they get the biofuels is devastating to the local environment in Africa. I think that would be interesting. It's a big amount of money as well. So it's usually what you find are stories that are interesting, but the amount of money is not big enough, which is a very cynical way of looking at it. It's not big enough to run a story. It's kind of like, well, it's only a couple of 100,000. Who really cares? And you think, well, that's one thing that I come up with like, sometimes with editors. But 64 million is a big amount. So I'd say you've got a story. And some of the other areas were constructions of hotels and nature sites. So that's a big thing in Romania and Bulgaria. And particularly outside the capital in Bulgaria, I think, I don't know if anyone knows the name of, there's this big ski resort that's being built connected to one of the politicians. It was receiving heaps in EU structural funds as well. So then I never got to look into. But I'll remember the name of the area later on, if anyone's interested. There's a Swedish company, a Swedish defence company who's receiving funds. I'll look that up if you're interested in doing something on that. Looking at the cost of administering the funds, so these consultancy agencies who kind of suck up a lot of the money in kind of administering it. That's something that is worth looking into. Not something that you can find out by approaching the actual data itself. I think you need to kind of look at in your country who are the big players and kind of going around and talking to businesses, and even kind of chambers of commerce, are making money out of. Right. Yeah, I think that's a really worthy story, and I think that's interesting because it's a failing on two parts. It's great on the part of the Chamber of Commerce actually making money out of what should be, a public money for small to medium enterprises, and a failing on the part of the Commission because they've made it so complicated that you have to employ somebody because you don't know how to get, to get the funds in the first place. It's a failing of communication, I think. Wind farms and solar panels. Solar panels in Spain is big. I think there's probably an area of quite a lot of organised crime in terms of, soft corruption, and an area that would be worth digging into if anyone speaks Spanish or is interested in that area. And the reason it's interesting because we've got biofuels, wind farms and solar panels. The reason these are something to focus on at the moment is because it's one of the objectives of structural fund spending. So every 7 years, they'll come up with kind of like a list of areas that they particularly want to put money into. And these are the areas where you're going to get, if it's a new area of innovation where people don't really understand it yet, like it used to be IT. And I know there was the digital eco scandal in Italy where somebody set up an IT company that never existed, and they got 6 million in funds. If you target the areas that are new and people don't quite have their head around yet, are the areas that are targeted by criminals. Big areas of expenditure, and that's where they look for their money. So feel free to play around with the database, ask me any questions at all during the course of the next couple of hours, and I'll be happy to help. That's a bit of a plug, but just to show that actually data-based and data-driven stories can attract real attention and get traction. For this project, we won the Reporting Europe Prize, which is a Thomson Reuters award for Reporting Europe across the EU. And we were also shortlisted for the IRE award, which was very exciting. Even though it was the shortlist, it's still great to see that kind of database stories can make a difference and make an impact. So anyway, this is my rant. You don't have to read that, but thank you very much for your attention. And anyway, do come and ask me any questions throughout the day. All right, thank you.